All right.
There we go.
Where are we? This is now episode 9 of the Blueprint Tour with Charlie.
Charlie Wilson.
Man, I didn't know you guys had your own band and everything.
Oh, yeah, we brought our own live band. We're trying to get Patrick Sampetti to hook us up with
the live audience?
Oh,
there
yeah. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. All right, episode 9. This was a surprise to you today, us being here with all of our gear, huh?
A little bit of an ambush, but it was like a planned ambush, I guess. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, no, happy to have our conference room available and happy to be here. Yeah.
We've actually just been kind of figuring it out on the fly a little bit ourselves because we got this. It's been evolving, and now we're getting better at letting people know how this goes down as we figure out how it goes down. Carter and I actually did a few test runs the week before.
Yeah, in my backyard.
Yeah, nice. Because we were like, how long is it going to take to set up? We didn't know, and so what we've been doing is the theme this tour. We're doing tours twice a year, roughly. Mm-hmm. This one is coordination, and generally how everybody agrees it's important, but when it goes wrong, it's always a lack of agreement on where that might have happened, and not trying to create a series where we can just blame each other, but more about talking about it. Everyone's perspective being so different. We've talked to the trades, the developers, and the designers, and everyone's definition of good coordination is different. And everybody's expectations of other people may or may not even align with those people's scope of work. Mm-hmm. You know, what we often find is engineers should have coordinated that. Well, you know, we only do what we are paid to do in our scope of work. And so a lot of times when I talk about this, I tell people, the more I talk about it as an engineer, the more it sounds like I'm saying we never coordinate. But that's not the case. We actually do. We just do it within a limitation. Like, you know, us and the light commercial might be just general permit ready stuff that can just go out and get a permit going. But there's still a lot of solving that has to be done on the builder side. And that's frustrating to the general contractor and the trade contractor, especially who has to fabricate, in our case, the ductwork. So that's kind of where we are. Why don't we, before we dive in, would you give us a little bit of a background of what you do?
Yeah, so with Baker Development Resources, I've been here for a little over 5 years now. We were started by Mark Baker, hence Baker Development Resources. In 2006, he was previously a planner at the City of Richmond. He worked his way up from the zoning department to be secretary to the Planning Commission. So basically running the land use administration division in the planning department. Got to the point where he thought he would, serve more people, I guess, in the private sector and help administer from the private side of the fence any development process that you might have to go through, predominantly in the City of Richmond, but also outlying localities. He was a one-man operation off and on for a good while. Then I came on and started helping him. And initially, and like still to a very high degree, our volume of work pertains to the entitlement process, right? So that's, we'll talk more about what I'm doing now and how that differs, but the entitlement process, we're basically assisting developers for the most part, property owners, sometimes contractors, with basically land use guidance and going through processes like special use permits, rezonings, conditional use permits, board of zoning appeals cases, et cetera, or even just someone comes and says, hey, what can I do with my property? We'll tell them based on zoning what you can do, based on future land use guidance, what you could consider doing through a certain process, right? And then we'll just kind of kick the tires on the actual property itself initially, just to say, hey, this might be in a Chest Bay Act or a Chest Bay management area or protection area. You should probably, despite what the zoning says, you should probably talk to a civil engineer about that. So coordination, right? We can kind of sniff out where things will ultimately go based on our overall experience. And for instance, we wouldn't want you to go through an entire SUP for something that's like inherently problematic from a civil engineering standpoint, right? So that's what a lot of our office does, is the actual upfront entitlement process that precedes things like permitting. So for the first 3 years of working here, I was focusing predominantly on entitlements, but then also on an a la carte basis, offering permitting assistance just for everything that follows that. Building permits, trade permits, work and street permits, land disturbance permits, things like that. And more I felt that need arise, and we had also hired a few more people in the interim, and thought it best to kind of divide and conquer our whole office scope of work from like entitlements and the construction permitting aspect of things. And I lead that division. It's myself and Hunter Mouse. We're doing predominantly just trade permits now. Commercial construction permits, residential building permits, commercial trade permits, residential trade permits, disturbance, right-of-way permits, work and street permits, utility permits, basically any dang permit that you could possibly need. Hunter and I are like your go-to for that. So within Baker Development Resources, we're able to see like the infancy of a project, like the actual idea, all the way to like execution and occupancy. And that's a pretty rare vantage point within the industry to basically walk the entire lifespan of a project. So
yeah, that's a lot of specialty knowledge of all kinds of things that come into play, not the least of which is just to start figuring out, wait, who can I help somebody? Who do I call? You know, do I call permit zip? Maybe you've called us a few times like, hey, so here's the situation, or a civil, or, you know, there's just so much background knowledge to help somebody figure out how to start thinking about the development process. Does that include like knowledge of underwriting packages? Like, will this work from an underwriting perspective or anything like that?
Yeah, it can. I mean, a lot of our, let's say we have a client who like finds a historic building, for instance, and maybe it's not in a historic district, but the building itself is historic and might qualify for tax credits.
Yeah.
If the client is asking us, hey, what should I do with this property? We could say, I mean, you could maybe divvy it up into apartments on the inside, but if you do that, you might forego a lot of the tax credits in doing that, because DHR is concerned with both the outside, obviously, of the building and also the inside to maintain that historic integrity of what the building's like initial purpose was for.
Yeah.
So we could say like, hey, that's one option. You could do that, but you risk, nullifying any historic tax credit potential that you might get. Maybe talk to, some architecture firm that specializes in the DHR process for that, if you want to better understand what the limitations are. Or you could maybe do something by right or with a special approval that could allow you to maintain that historic tax credit potential, for instance. So that's like one example of how we understand our role, and our advice can implicate other people's skill sets, expertise, and advice. And, we operate, I guess, in a fiduciary capacity, right, in the client's best interest. So if we know in the back of our heads there might be some benefit to doing something a certain way, even though that way isn't like our exact skill set, we want to at least acknowledge that is something that they should consider. So,
yeah, that's a lot to try to sort out and unpack, but because a lot of what you're saying are words that in from an engineer are vaguely familiar with, but it's interesting how intimately you're connected with that process. So you're so far early on in the development where you're talking about like what to do with the soil itself potentially, or all the decisions of what it will be will impact all this. And so you do have to make probably some sweeping guesses a lot of times about what may be feasible or not. And so I'm just guessing that like that could be troublesome. You're like, okay, I think this could work, but we're not in a place yet where we need to hire a professional engineer yet to help us understand this, because that could be too expensive in the soft cost stage. And then things move along, and then you have a guy like me be like, oh yeah, I need a room that's, I don't know, 3 times the size of so how do you deal with that like challenge of you need to make guesses to move something forward, and you're not necessarily able to know exactly what it'll be. So when the rubber hits the road and the design starts to show, and that extra $80,000 of total design fees show up, things might not go exactly how planned. How do you deal with those challenges?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is baked into like the inherent trust that we're able to build with our clients over time. Like if a client is reaching out to us initially and we're telling them things like, okay, if you want to switch use groups for this tenant space and put a restaurant in here, you should probably talk to a MEP engineer to make sure there's actually an economical way of doing that. Because usually something can be engineered, right? But it's often a question of should it be, and that's really what the client's decision comes down to. So, like we're very clear to our clients. We're not the only thing we can actually successfully say we're experts on is, City of Richmond zoning processes, entitlement processes, et cetera. Like we're extremely competitive at that. And, we can say that with a straight face, but we can't say, oh, I'm a building code professional.
Yeah.
Even though I'm working explicitly with building and trade permits right now, I'm not a structural engineer. I'm not an architect. And so I have to qualify everything as that. And I know enough to be dangerous. And that's what the client appreciates. They don't want someone who's just like shooting emails back and forth, but having like the filter and the awareness of what should be asked and when, I think is what makes us useful in that regard. So like in terms of what you do, I guess it's just like, have your guard up, allow them to trust you, improve your worth, and then get them comfortable with, your service providers that you like to send people to. Obviously, Permissiv's one of them. There are others that I like to send work to because I feel comfortable working with them, and I feel like their head is in a similar place, and they appreciate our awareness of what they do.
I think trust has been a repeating theme in this industry, which is a tough one to build trust in because of how expensive things are and how expensive the wrong direction can go. And so trust building, and Stuart Evans and Chase, his brother at Evans Construction, talk about it as trust hurdles, throughout the process, especially the GC has so many trust hurdles to overcome. The classic design engineer versus trade contractor inherent battle that'll just never disappear. But building trust between those two is the difference between, I think, a successful and non-successful project for us in our world, because it's always, we're drawing things that you can roll your eyes at if you're the trade contractor, but what's not understood is how much time is spent for us evaluating that change of use and what that means for ventilation rates and all the dealing with moisture inside of the building and all of the other things that are more or less abstract at the engineering high level, code compliance and how to remove moisture from the air are these abstract things. So the ductwork that we draw for our budgets and like commercial isn't perfectly thought through,
right?
And that's the reality of it. And it's frustrating to the person that has to fabricate and install it, that there's that little detail in it. And so building trust and starting out at the kickoff meeting for us is what we've been talking about. It's just like, so we can show up before things start getting built, ideally before they get priced.
Right,
and
right,
tell
right.
them how much was assumed there on our side. So that's how we've been dealing with the trust side of things. But
yeah. Like Charlie mentioned earlier, you know enough to be dangerous. I mean, the whole process and all the codes are so connected. So we kind of pick up on things that we're not experts in. But you always got to start with like saying, hey, look, I'm not an architect, but I do know this. But here's an architect you can talk to.
Right.
Like qualifying beforehand.
Yeah. And that's just basic awareness that you gain working in the industry and, building a portfolio of work that you've contributed to and seen, where things can go wrong. Because for us, you might have one client, right? And they might do X amount. But that client needs to know that you also have other clients and you do even more for them. And you have you have a bigger body of work than just what they're doing. And I think once the client realizes that, they tend to be a little more trusting of you, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
things that should be obvious, but sometimes aren't.
Yeah. There's a lot of those things in this industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we find ourselves, repeating things to the clients that to them it's the first time. To us, it's the 1,000th time. We have to remind ourselves that is part of our job, to not just get frustrated with having to say that same thing over and over again. And it's for them the first time. But another thing that's brought up, I'm curious how it might apply to you and everybody we've talked to, is the risk that the client themselves brings to the project, their experience or lack of experience in the process. I kind of think of it like one job I'd never want to do is anything related to weddings.
But you could MC a wedding, it looks like.
For a wedding, it's their first, hopefully maybe second or third time, but anyway, it doesn't happen that often for people. And so when you're providing a service to that person, it's just everything is amplified. Every tiny human error that may exist is amplified for the user. And so the same is true for development or let's say a church or a religious facility versus a seasoned multifamily developer. They're expecting contingency. They're expecting like the early underwriting process that they go through at this phase with you as it gets to the engineering to not quite pan out. That leasable square footage starts to shrink or whatever may happen from the idea of how we use it to the end point, or which often happens for us is HVAC is grossly underestimated, and we have to go through that process of, okay, you can't do a 5-ton unit in every single building that you build. It's not like ubiquitously applicable, and so we have to talk about it. And we've talked about a few times. I have to resort to scare tactics to say, if you value engineer, quote unquote, or other words, we make people say feature reduce, then you're reducing the ability to remove moisture. So this is the coaching we give people. This, like, we're late in the game. Like, the underwriting's already set, the budgets are there, they already have a plan for HVAC, and now I have to fight for somebody not to destroy their investment if they're wrong in HVAC. And
then you start to feel like a project manager. That's something that when you care about something, at least when I care about something, like in Hunter, everyone else in our office, like we actively care. And there are times where you almost think we care more about something than even the developer. And trying to remain, I don't know, just trying to continue to be a resource to the developer without sounding like you're trying to warn them, or it's just tough. We have this problem a lot where we're following up for even something like a signature on an application form, right? Or any volume of things that are imperative to the application process, and we have to follow up a lot more than you'd think sometimes to get that actually back. And it gets to the point where you feel like you are actually managing the project, when really our sole purpose, our scope of work is solely to interface between you and city staff.
Yeah.
Right. But there are times where that kind of bleeds out into, a service provider is taking a while to get back to us. Am I supposed to be the one kind of like following up, or because maybe there's background conversations happening between the client and their service providers, but we're just like, we're kind of the pivot point, right? And when does that pivot point actually, like I said, bleed into a borderline project management capacity? We're happy to do that. We're happy to move things along. It's in our best interest to do that. It's in the client's, it's in the city's best interest to get things going. But at the same time, you have to be careful about doing that, because you don't want to come off as you are actually like the developer.
Yeah,
because we're not.
We deal with that, and we're not even expected to be pivot points. So I'm sure you guys do a lot. You guys are like the pivot point, but it's like, where does it become, this is something I want to do or should do, versus like drawing a boundary on, hey, look, this isn't really something that we have included in the scope. It's probably a fine line to try to walk.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's, we're not attorneys either. It's another thing we're not. And
there
we go.
It goes into that, because so much what you do is basically interpreting at least the jurisdiction laws of zoning, and it is the law. And we're like building attorneys as engineers, and responsible for interpreting the building code. But zoning is a completely different world. Yeah.
Yeah. And we work alongside a lot of land use attorneys as well. There are some projects that, we in effect are the land use attorney, even though we're clear like we're not. But just by virtue of there not being one involved for whatever reason, we are kind of tasked with providing that level of advice. But again, it's just you just got to be careful, I guess, and not try to, because and there are things that we might be able to do that, like, would an attorney? I feel like there are. And again, not an attorney.
Yeah.
But I feel like there are limitations on,
disclaimer.
Always.
We can tell clients pretty directly sometimes, like, hey, I know that's what you want, but we're not going to submit something that's presented that way because it's against your own best interest. And there are some times where, if you're an attorney, you might have to submit something, so it's just, there are pros and cons to both, I guess. There are some days, we wish that we were attorneys, and there are other days that we're thankful we're not. So.
Yeah. We find ourselves in that we call it, the engineering supervision legal requirements that people don't know about. In fact, engineers themselves often struggle keeping up with the regulation of our own practice, because we have these ethical duties to life safety of humans inside of buildings. And so our first and foremost minimum responsibility to a drawing is that. And that's why coordination comes up a lot. Like, the engineer should have done it. And like, well, really the only thing we should do is what's in that contract from a civil dispute perspective, but also legally speaking, just making sure our specs cover the safety of human occupants, not whether a duct may or may not be conflicting with a beam.
Yeah.
That's not a legal responsibility we have, because we are, technically speaking, building attorneys. We're licensed to interpret and enforce more or less the building code.
Right.
And so, although we're not able to, I guess, advise in a court, I don't know that weird thing, but we do have a public responsibility, and it's regulated, and that's why it's licensed, and architects are the same. And there's a whole nother conversation about that in general, about how easy it is to steal a stamp and forge somebody's signature.
Yeah, we're not there's no like consulting license.
Yeah.
So we're in that gray area of we can provide counsel, I guess, in like the advice sense, but not in like the legal sense. So I think all of our clients are aware of our limitations too. And, like I said, there are a number of land use and transactional real estate attorneys that we work alongside pretty routinely.
And so for their responsibility, it is to just, are they interpreting what you can and cannot do with the land, I guess, the land use attorney? What is it?
I guess like there's overlap to the type of guidance that we provide, but they can do things like record deeds, subdivision, like actually transact.
Gotcha.
And there are times where we're like, oh man, I wish we could do that because it would go a lot quicker sometimes, not all the time. But
yeah, it's similar to being like, you'll probably need a 3-phase service in here for this new restaurant. You need to talk to an engineer to get it sealed. Type thing versus, being like, this is probably a way to do it. But in order for this to be public record or officially a transaction, you need the attorney to basically endorse it.
And then also there's like the posture that comes with being an attorney, right? I mean, we know our stuff, especially when it comes to the city processes, but there are times where having someone with like more of a legal underpinning saying something to the city about a comment that they got on like a subdivision or something, that can hit a little bit different, right? If it's coming from someone with that skill set. So we're fully aware of that. And we, like I said, we do involve and work with miscellaneous attorneys when it's called for. So
yeah, that's a completely different world of what we do. How about when
are you trying to get all these attorneys mad at me? Is that the
no.
Keep on going.
Yeah. So do you like attorneys or not?
I do.
For the record, you hate attorneys.
I'm pro legal advice.
No, I totally get it. I mean, taxes are similar. People, you can get a lot of good tax unofficial advice from a developer, right, to do with like a 1031 exchange or whatever types of things you can do.
And we don't know a lot of that. We know it's out there. We know when it might help you, but we're not. We have no experience working on stuff like that. So.
Yeah. The formal paperwork would always come down to the CPA license, to whatever goes on behind that, plus an attorney, and that's just the way things are. Everybody has to have that accountant, attorney, developer, development expert, engineer. And it is what it is. It's so confusing that it basically sustains people's individual livelihood because of that specialty knowledge. And what you guys do is different than the attorney. It's a different level of responsibility, I think, altogether, or knowledge or value. Whereas the attorney's very, very specific, kind of like an engineer.
And one thing also, and you guys might have seen this on projects that we've worked on together, where we might be handling like the actual permitting application process for, one of your MEP submittals. Like the trust that we build with the developer, applicant, whomever, that's reciprocated also with people who work at the city. Like Hunter and I, as far as I know, there's no familiarity having bred contempt with us being in their inbox constantly for all the applications that we've done. I think between the two of us, we actually calculated we're somewhere last year in 2023. I'll drop this news here. There was a LinkedIn post coming, but I'll hook you guys up with the traffic. We did about, just Hunter and myself handled, I think 4.6% of the city's applications period last year, which sounds like a small number, but when you zoom out and you're like, oh, this is like the capital city of Virginia. There were, I think it was, I need to check the math again, but I know the number is 4.6%. So for just two people to be able to do that, the city knows when they see an application come from us, they know, okay, well, I'm actually relieved that it came from them and not,
Yeah.
some site superintendent for a Class B electrical company, right, doing this commercial upfit. Because chances are we are going to do it better.
Yeah.
Not that, nothing against trades submitting their own permits, but, if it's just like, it's a matter of fact, like we do it all the time. We're averaging like 3 or 4 a day. And so it's literally what we do. When they see that, the city automatically trusts what we submitted to be more complete, and I'm pretty sure it translates to quicker everything, which benefits the client as well. So
Yeah, well, just the fact that there's an advocate that they can reach out to take care of some administrative thing that knows it and say, oh yeah, whoops, okay, and fixes it and solves it and it gets through the door versus that administrative hookup going to somebody that's like, that dang checklist, City of Richmond checklist for electrical permits or whatever.
no com check. Or,
whatever.
Yeah.
You've seen it 1,000 times, so they know when they reach out to you, it can get taken care
and
of.
There's also what the city. This is when the city really enjoys having us involved. Is when someone actually tried to submit something on their own, and then it went nowhere very fast and sat there for so long, and there was a lot of love lost between whoever applied and the intake staff, and basically making a mountain out of a molehill, which should have been a pretty clerical submission process by virtue of the applicant not knowing the ins and outs, the city not being able to their hands are tied too. They can't they can only say but so much, right? Because they are there only to answer the questions that are before them, but they can't themselves email architects and ask for, hey, you guys need to show the use group on the cover sheet, or whatever it is. They can't really do that because they can only interface with whomever applied. And if whoever applied isn't someone who is going to be able to actually understand what the heck's going on, then everyone's kind of stuck. And then everyone gets pissed off. Can I say pissed off?
Oh yeah, you can say really
yes. Pissed off. Everyone's pissed off. And ultimately it festers, and then they're finally like, that's it, I'm calling Baker Development, whatever. And so we come in, and then we very calmly talk to the city like, hey, this is what they did, this is what we're pretty sure should have happened, can you please confirm that? And then they'll say, yes, that is what happened. And then I can take that and show it to whomever the prospective client is at that point and be like, hey, we looked into it, we know how to do this, the city agrees with our application process, here's our estimate. And oftentimes they can't sign it fast enough because they're just so ready to get past it. And even, they might even be in the point where they're in the field waiting for the permit to be issued. And they're at a point where they've been spending 8 months just trying to figure out how to get the dang thing applied for. Right.
Yeah.
So that's that's when the city appreciates us and the counties also. But not to say we're friends with every single person in the city. There's probably some animosity there, but that happens with the volume of work that we do. But we still maintain professional decorum, and we try to be a resource to everybody, and that's the city included. So
that's been a common motif, is how in this environment where stress can peak extremely fast. What are the varying strategies people have for dealing with maintaining a level head when you just want to be like,
well, it's nice having a team because Hunter and I can I don't want to say good cop bad cop, but there's a little bit of that. There's we'll maintain the calm, cool, collected, and then if it gets to a point where something's got to give, and maybe someone higher up the food chain in the city needs to be contacted about something, then we can kind of use that to everyone's benefit. But we never come out of the gate doing that kind of thing. We always give everything the benefit of the doubt, and just let it run its due course to see where it goes. And then if we need an extra opinion or further assistance with something, then we can engage backup options. So
yeah.
We got Phil in here. We can. Do you have any questions, Phil, for the expert?
Phil's been very shy.
Yeah.
We just brought him in.
Okay.
Y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
You got me? Yeah. Everything that I've heard so far, the thing that seems to keep coming up is the team itself, which, usually I think early on in our our MEP work, we were realizing that in our market, people don't even know they need an MEP engineer. So by the time they get to us, they're already annoyed, because
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
just like, oh, you're telling me now I have to pay 5 figures to this person who's going to do something I don't care about, that's just another soft cost expense I have to toss in here before I get my building built. So it's just interesting to me, like, and that's for us a pretty typical part of every single building submission, MEP, but along the line, there's always these team members who could be there, who are missing, or may not be absolutely necessary, but you're talking about like land use attorneys and stuff like that. It's like, very few people, when they're getting into a project as a developer or something like that, or if they're trying to open up their little restaurant, think, God, when am I going to get my land use attorney so that I can really make sure, my SUP is all set to go when I submit? No one thinks about any of that stuff. Half of them aren't even thinking about the fact that they're going to have to pay another $12,000 to MEP engineers.
Yeah.
Or however much civil will cost for the project, and there's just, in bringing up the idea of project manager, I think everybody involved at some point has to be the project manager bridge, because a lot of times that person just does not exist from start to finish. So we're all having to pick up a baton, even though it's not necessarily in our scope. And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues coordination wise. There's those little scope gaps and scope creeps where there should be somebody. In a perfect world, there would be somebody to pick that up immediately, but no one is. And because of that, whoever picks it up is the person who gets, the person with money is mad at them, whoever does pick it up, because it seems like it was their fault to have not
why
taken
didn't you
it.
let me know this would be a thing? And it's worse that when you find out that it's 12,000 for MEP, because that's just the beginning of it. Because now your engineer is going to take your 40,000 MEP budget and make it 150,000, and it's a different problem, because we are taking responsibility for the code,
Right.
which means that now we have this ventilation that we would basically have to say this 5-ton unit that everybody has in their budget is not going to work, or if it is, then it's going to be extremely. Well, I always tell people it's not illegal to be uncomfortable. So if you can be uncomfortable, you just know that going in.
What did I tell you about our windows here?
Yeah,
I heard the souped-up Camaro already drove by. We can mark that off the checklist.
Just if you're tuning in, you're listening. What's this building here? Tell them a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're at 801 East Main Street, which is no, I'm sorry, that's never mind. We're not at 801. We're at 530 East Main Street. Headed somewhere else right now. 530 East Main Street. Beautiful old building. We love it here. The windows, however, are single pane. We front onto Main Street, and there's just always something to hear out there. No one's been like screaming or anything. That's a positive.
That'd be good. It'd be good. You'll see. It's not so bad. It's in our headphones. We hear everything, but when you're listening to it back, it's actually not bad, and you get a couple fun sounds. But yeah, so we're the coordination aspect. There's a lot that was just covered there, Phil. Thanks for chiming in on that. I like that. You start this process. There is this coordination element from our perspective. Also, you're in charge of the permitting. There's a lot that we specify has to be done before permit. That's on our drawings. That is never done before permit, like investigation or things like that, like finding out if this connection may be able to be made, or pre-commissioning, talking to the owner about how are we going to test this to verify that this works and meets your needs. What are those needs? How do you define success? As part of the commissioning process that, unlike commercial, never gets done because there's not much budget for it. Nobody has the extra 20 grand to have a commissioning authority, even though it's code required, by the way, for anybody watching. The energy code requires that you do commissioning on the equipment. But there's only so much that can reasonably, I guess, be enforced.
Yeah, and you guys have done. You guys have gotten really creative. I remember one time there was a client who I came to represent who had gotten bad service from a contractor. It was a mixed use upfit, and a lot of the work had been done because the contractor claimed to have the permits that he would have needed but didn't. So it was kind of this root canal exercise of how do we retroactively get this code compliant and safe. And what we were able to do there is you guys had this like live video tour thing that was recorded. And I was the useful idiot. I walked around with the cell phone videotaping. You guys would be like, okay, can you like, I literally climbed up like on a ladder to get up to like an air handler that was above one of the units. And yeah, I really put it all on the line for you guys. But yeah, it was really cool because you can get that you as efficiently and as cost sensitively we're able to get that level of detail by just telling me what to point at with my cell phone, right? Rather than send everybody out there and their grandma in the field and have a meeting and coordinate access. And it was just that was just one thing that stuck out to me, and that was like 3 years ago, I think. So
I started during COVID. We were like, wait, I guess we could just, anybody could be in the building, but there's not much we have to actually physically be there for. And then started transitioning into, wait, 3 separate engineers in a car driving somewhere, is that necessary for every project?
Right.
And we started realizing then, wait, what does it mean to do a survey? And we started questioning and evaluating things. And
right. And also the recorded aspect of the video.
Yeah.
Like you can go somewhere in person and remember things faintly, but chances are, unless you're recording it, you're not going to have like a perfect, like, I guess, record of what you looked at and what it said and what the context was.
We're able to actually take better notes at our computer virtually on a PDF markup than we do in the field when we're trying sketching things and you can barely read what you wrote. And you're like, did I mean to put that there? You know, you have the recording, but also just the notes are better quality. So that one was useful in the industry to take forward in that way, because before I think people would have been like, no, I need you in the field, and insisted on it, whereas it became normalized during the COVID thing.
Yeah, that's when
We have this idea as a sister company called Looksee, and it really ties into kind of what you guys do. And the idea is to take a look-see at a building before, you know, I call it pre-due diligence, where could it be somebody like you with your expertise on a call with an engineer and an architect, all just virtually while somebody else walks through, so we can all maybe fill out we call it a look-see rating. And you mentioned earlier the risk inherent when you decide to switch use, and that's a big risk factor for us when somebody wants to say take an office and make it a church. Assembly uses have a huge cost implication where basically virtually none of the HVAC can be working anymore, as opposed to an office that stays an office. Sure, that's probably going to be fine. The level of renovation would be lower, all these other things that are code related. And so that's the idea, is that like this company could be kind of like you call up, and if you're a developer wanting to look at a couple properties, of course, this would be adaptive reuse stuff. And it could work for maybe land stuff, but generally it's, you get in there, maybe you look at 4 or 5 in a day, but you have a team kind of filling out a form of their like risk protocols, checking it off, and then at the end you have what we would call like a look-see rating of a D- versus a A+ or whatever, so that you can say, okay, do I need to now spend that next $10,000 on this soft cost for like $500 a pop versus $5,000 every time I want a professional? And then out of that would be baked in like an automatic proposal from everybody that was there. So you kind of also have the team members ready to go and assembled with a price for their next level of due diligence. Just an idea that we've been toying around with that comes from that virtual survey.
Yeah, and I mean that's something like what you mentioned. Zoning can be a blind spot for people, and it's never too early to bring them to bring that lens to the actual idea, I guess, that you're looking into doing. Because we get an unfortunate amount of business from people who have gone all the way to building permit, sometimes commercial building permit, with no real analysis of what the zoning was. And sometimes it's fluky. Sometimes it's like, oh, in this district you can do X with an existing building, but if you're doing new construction, it needs to be like this. I'm simplifying it. I can get nerdier if you want, but and people have made application. They've even gotten public works review. They've gotten everybody's review, and then sometimes zoning is the last to review, and they're like, sorry, you got to get a special use permit. And that's a legislative process. It's basically, you got to go to city council to get special permission to do exactly that on your property, because the zoning doesn't permit it. We get a lot of business that way. It's kind of heartbreaking. And when someone's coming to you with that need and they're already that far along in the process. But it just kind of is what it is. And, cannot stress enough like the upfront nature of our value, I guess. So
Yeah, but before you get too far into this idea, talk to somebody that has that experience in the permitting and what's possible, and specifically with the jurisdiction, and knows what the city is usually favors, you know, in terms of what the zoning is like, which way the zoning may or may not go. You know, so that's really an interesting thing and extremely valuable. The problem is, I guess, like you said, most people don't even know that that's a call to make, or who,
right.
when you're in the middle of this idea, you want to buy this commercial property, and let's say you're Kenny, Mr. Permit Zip, bought a thing, and you have this idea, and I go into it, but I'm not a developer. It's maybe my first major commercial renovation, and suddenly I find myself there being like, oh man. But you know,
I kind of sometimes I like it when people come in with that. I don't know if innocence is the right word, but that's where like a lot of creativity happens, is people making decisions based on what should happen and not in regard to you know, tedious, boring things like zoning. Even though it's important and it's impassable, right? It still allows the idea to happen. And you know, maybe you do have to get a special use permit, but maybe it's worth getting that. Maybe the market needs that property to be something more than what zoning can happen. And had you have had the awareness, you might not have had the idea in the first place. So we're not knocking people coming to us that way. There's like a certain value to just approaching it from a what do I want to do standpoint.
I always say Kurt Yartz and McCoy is good with this, and Jason Gio is also a Tallheimer. They're extremely creative. They know just enough about it, but then they come up with these off the wall ideas. Or Scott Waters Monument. Yeah, they'll just throw stuff out and just see if it hits, and then it's something that an engineer would never have thought of. But you're like, oh wait, technically that would work, because that wouldn't be illegal. This wouldn't be illegal, but you would never have thought about it.
We're like so far in the weeds of what would be like the perfect, not the perfect engineering solution, but a reasonable one. And they know just enough to have that crazy idea, or enough to be dangerous, like you said. And it gets us thinking, like, you know, that actually might work.
No, it's fun to be able to think about things that way, I guess. So,
you know, so you always hear folks be very frustrated with the bureaucracy of this, like City of Richmond or these larger cities, but we've seen on the opposite side, I won't say a building or the city that we were in, but let's just say it's in Virginia, a smaller city. They don't have the resources to enforce the code. And well, when we were out there, you know, the person that was very upset that there had to be an engineer involved at all. They were just like, I don't understand why engineer has to do with this. We're just doing X, Y, Z. It's very simple. Don't need no engineer. And so we started investigating, and we found an extremely dangerous existing condition in that building that will potentially lead directly to loss of life if not dealt with due to...
An electrical one.
Yeah, an electrical one. Like, very dangerous scenario where what they're doing could potentially create a violent fire in this building while occupied. And that's why a small city like that would enforce that, because they don't have the expertise or of each individual permit reviewer or building code. You know, a lot of cities have just one building code expert that's supposed to try to cover all the requirements.
And they might be the zoning enforcer too. You know, they could be doing way more than anyone should be doing.
Exactly. So, and nobody, including myself, really don't understand the nuance between what zoning and building code is and how that's varies from state to state. In Virginia, the building code cannot be overwritten, but in Maryland, it can from city to city. So the cities must enforce the building code in Virginia, but in zoning picks up wherever the building code is silent. So for us, it's usually where grease traps, for example, are enforced by the zoning authority who runs their own sewers. And although in the building code it says the grease trap is required, it doesn't say like how to enforce it or how to size it. Or
where it can go.
Yeah, those kind of things. That's down to the zoning. And so it takes a long time for an engineer even to try to understand the nuance of those little things of our own topics, let alone a building code official probably would have no clue about that one nuance. Yeah. And so these smaller jurisdictions, they lean on professionals, and so they may enforce that. And we found in this particular city that, thank God we were there and saw it, because if this was built, I mean, it could easily lead to a fire for sure.
In the city, you know, it's a good thing they required it, right? Because if they didn't, they just took everyone's word for it. You know, by virtue of them issuing whatever permit would have been required, sans actual engineered drawings, they would have had the liability in most cases. So
the jurisdiction for not enforcing. Yeah. It's a tough one. And then there's the other nuance between like the fire marshal's authority, the building code authority, the zoning authority, and all of tracing all of that back. And, you know, we get stuck in the middle of it. But, you know, the other side of the equation is having the extra pain in the butt bureaucracy for a larger city, but it generally tends towards safer buildings, which is the purpose of it all anyways.
Yeah.
but and you mix in human error, which is going to be there no matter what, and then there we are at coordination. Like, wait, how did this go wrong? And everybody's like, I did my thing, I spec'd it, you didn't follow my drawings, or whatever. We often hear, I did it per the drawings, and our counter often is, you failed to meet our spec. But that's just a non-productive conversation. So we've been working really, that's what this is all about. Just learning really what it is, how projects are from y'all's perspective, or the trade contractors. And instead of having that battle just become that unproductive conversation, to just start understanding what each other are doing. We're learning a lot. We're learning quite a bit about it all.
Have you guys talked to any trade subcontract? I know you talked to some GCs in doing this. Curious to see.
They're the funnest to talk to, because they're the ones that'll really lay in on us and talk some shit. We haven't yet directly. We went to Vortex's office, but we haven't on the record done anything. We just chatted with them about how they're fabricators, so they build often directly off of a drawing that we made, but we ask for coordination drawings and fabrication drawings before that's done. So that step's being skipped. And it is what it is. You kind of have to build off something. So it's really no fault. But technically, there's not enough money in the budget to do what we're asking for that level of detail. But then it becomes well, if nobody's been paid to do it and there are errors, then who is responsible for that? And that's where this coordination conversation comes up.
Right.
If there isn't money for it, then who's there to blame if we've excluded it from our services and change orders show up? And so it's been more healthy for us to just talk to fabricators about our perspective and then hear theirs. And it's like, well, I can't price off your drawings. And we say, well, yeah, you're not supposed to be able to. We're asking for another set to exist in between when our design finishes and you start fabrication. That never gets created. And they're like, oh, we're like, yeah. So who do we talk to about this? Usually it's the developer.
Yeah. And some developers, I mean, there's pros and cons to every approach. Some are hands off with the understanding that their GC and other service providers are going to act in their best interest, which is almost always the case, right? So, but then there are some that really want to get in the weeds, and that's just how their mind operates, right? Like some developers genuinely want to know how your ductwork's going to interact with your truss package, for instance. So there's like a full spectrum there, right? And I guess knowing the personality of whomever your client is usually, I guess, kind of the source of that productivity, at least from our perspective, because then out of the gate, I kind of need to massage my follow-ups this way versus that way. The developer might expect me to have more of a knowledge about what the design is, or they might just see me purely as go crack skulls with the locality. So it just kind of depends, and there's a little bit of nuance there that we're comfortable operating in. We just need to know kind of implicitly which hats we're going to have to wear, I guess, throughout the entire process.
Do you want to be updated at every single step along the way, or do you just want me to get it done and just let you know when it's finished? Or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, I mean, some people will follow up for status like within 3 hours of making an application, for instance. So it's like, just submitted. that's the status.
So there's another question in coordination that you may find yourself in the middle of. So, I just told you about our drawings are not fabrication drawings, yet things get fabricated from them and blah, blah, blah. You get your permit released, but then what gets inspected doesn't match the permit. You probably find yourself in the middle of that portion of it too, right? Inspections, little engineering letters maybe, or revised permit submission. How does that look like from your perspective?
Repeat the question one more time.
So the shit has already hit the fan, right?
Okay.
So things are off and the installation doesn't match the permit that you worked so hard to get approved, right? And so now we're inspecting.
And there's a post-permit. Yeah, and there needs to be a post-permit revision. Yeah, this happens more often than not, and it tends to happen more on alteration type work, or addition, tenant upfit type of stuff. Not as much new construction. Those tend to be a little more plug and play from a what was designed standpoint. We just have to, at that point, just plainly state, okay, this needs a post-permit revision to address inspector comments. We need X, X, and X. And then right out of the gate, if we just do that, that kind of automatically just cuts the lets out of any of the non-productive conversations that you guys don't really want to get into. You have to kind of think at the margin and address what's right in front of you. And, the city could care less about whose fault it is, right, or the locality. They just need the problem addressed. And in a secondary way, so does the subcontractor, because they need to maintain a schedule in the field,
Yeah.
right? They need to know to what extent they can work elsewhere on the site, absent this specific issue, whatever it might be. The GC needs to know that so they can queue up other subcontractors that are implicated by that. The developer needs to know that to what extent it might affect their construction loan if the draws are timed based on certain schedules. So it's like, at the end of the day, our role is to just do it.
Yeah.
Nike status. You might have to cut that
Too
out
bad
so
that
Nike
one's
doesn't. No, but honestly, like to just do what needs to be done and kind of like not get swept up in whatever like dialogue there might be between the other actors, I guess. So we kind of have a privilege to be able to operate in that way, unless something was our fault, which that's we're assuming as much as anybody, but we never mess up. Like absolutely never.
Yeah,
Just doesn't
engineers,
happen.
we don't have any. That's the challenge with this conversation too. Is just being pretty open with folks about the challenges in the industry, and that's why I like you asked about trade contractors. I like speaking with them because they don't mind talking shit, and even the general contractors, Stuart Evans, like that was the first one that was really fun, and he's fine being like, Kenny, you can't do that in this church. They're only using their sanctuary 3 hours a week type stuff, and over engineered, which is also another cuss word, by the way, for us, because people will say over engineered so quickly, but that you have to think engineers are often just basically more accurate than a weather person. So we're literally trying to guess how the weather might behave for the next 30 years, which we all know is changing. So then there's that, and the assumption for the next 30 years of that use is going to people are going to actually use that space the way it was described. This number of people will be here, here, and here, and here. And if any of those assumptions change, which are massive assumptions, huge model of assumption,
Right.
suddenly you have these comfort issues. So I don't even know where I was going with that other than to just say, like, there's all of this in our world that we get from the trade contractor. They'll be like, engineer messed it up, right? Did you consider the solar gains and all that? Mm-hmm. And so the conversation with them is often fun because they're very comfortable with talking shit to us, and we like that on our side. But we start realizing, man, outside of our little universe of mechanical, there's all of this happening before we show up, and we put rain on the parade by saying, sorry about this idea not working, or you might have constraints that you've agreed to. Let's say, here's another example. DHR, for example, some constraints have been agreed to as long as you don't see these things here, here, and here. And we show up and say, well, how are we going to make that work?
Right.
Because this equipment is not going to physically be constrained to that space. And then boom, all of whatever planning that you may have been a part of starts to fall apart, and people get frustrated because now it's like, well, why didn't you coordinate that? Why didn't you have that knowledge?
Yeah. Why wasn't my MEP engineer an expert in DHR?
Before they were even on the project at all.
Before.
But that could easily happen. Like if you get fully permitted, work commences, and then mechanical subcontractor wants something changed, and you guys change it, and the locality permits it, and then DHR is doing their walkthrough like 6 months down the road or whatever when the project's done, and they're like, wow, that really, you took out all the, you like softened it over all of the historic ceilings or something that you needed protected to be able to qualify for your 30% tax credit or whatever it is. Like that's a big screw up, and that's hypothetical. I'm sure that's happened somewhere, but I'm not aware. But I could just, the tortured mind that I have seeing all of these things that go wrong and having to fix them all the time for people. That's one perfectly plausible scenario that I can see play out.
And now the whole deal that depended on the 30% is in jeopardy, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
So the soft skills in your role must be through the roof.
Oh yeah,
so soft.
Yes. That's such a soft skill expert. I mean, like, that's crazy. So you're dealing with that many permits, 5% roughly that you mentioned, and all of the conversations you have to have. It's very similar to me. Like, I often think the architect and the GC are in the middle of everything, but there you are too, in basically the middle of everything, and needing to know all of the players,
right,
and be able to understand their perspective.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of that just comes from like the core of what our company has done, which again was predominantly land use and entitlement. So that being like the inner core of what we do. If someone just sends a building permit to me, like first right out of the gate, I'm like looking at the zoning map to see if there is any special approval authorized for it, checking the site plan against whatever that special approval might have been, because people might have given me a permit that's not conforming to zoning, and I'm like, hey, we can submit this, but it's not going to work. We could be better using our time getting a special exception from the Board of Zoning Appeals, special use permit if needed. But just knowing right out the gate where things will go generally is kind of what we do, honestly.
So the zoning is just for folks listening that are curious about it, like educating them on the building permit process.
Mm-hmm.
You let's just say I'm a developer. I bought a building, want to do something with it. Of course, they ideally would reach out to you, right? And they'd start that.
Yeah. If they're interested in, hey, I don't want to deal with getting the permit, I'll hire these guys to get my permit. Like, that's as simply put as it could possibly be.
And then the city is looking for some kind of drawings. We're not talking special use. We're saying you think that what they want to do conforms already with the zoning.
Yeah, just a basic, like, let's say you're building a new house on like a lot in Churchill, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
To make your building permit application, you'll need, your actual construction drawings, right? So foundations, framing details, trusses, engineered lumber, et cetera, soils report. But then you'll need a site plan that takes that survey and juxtaposes what you're going to build there and shows proposed setbacks to property lines, respective to other buildings, et cetera. It's kind of a rabbit hole that we could go down. Again, if you wanted me to, just let me know. I'll just
this is good.
give you the
This
full
is some
dose.
pure technical useful knowledge for folks,
Yeah.
So they're looking at all of the setbacks. Like you have a
Right.
civil plan, the structural, and they're also making sure the building doesn't fall over. We're talking residential too.
Yeah. So even just single family, which you guys don't operate in, but that's a
We do
good
some
portion.
for like the giant ones
Right.
that people want us to.
Yeah, or like a more like a townhome development with more coordinated, depending on whether it's a commercial permit for multiple dwellings on a property, or that you guys could be involved in residential for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But with the site plan, you're basically telling zoning reviews every single building permit pretty much. Like, they're going to look at it regardless of if they need to or not. They still get assigned for virtually every submittal. And in doing that, they'll see the property, and they'll say, that lot doesn't conform to R5 zoning standards or R6 zoning. There's a lot of zoning lurking in our neighborhoods that was applied in the 1970s, and it's still there.
Oh yeah.
And it was kind of, I don't want to say maliciously applied, but that was an era in urban development in general where, localities like suburban counties, for instance, that was like that's where everyone was going generally. And the cities, they felt like they were blighted, not because of like the market conditions and the white flight that was happening and, just the people fleeing the city. And this happened in Richmond. This happened all over the country, north, south, everywhere. And because of that, the cities in that time, they applied zoning to kind of echo more suburban massing. So like a lot of Churchill is zoned R5, which would imply that if you're going to create a new lot, you need a 50-foot lot width, you need 6,000 square feet of lot area, whereas the historic development pattern might have, 17-foot lot width, 2,000 square feet of lot area. And so that gets to the point where, okay, you need to prove that lot is legally non-conforming. That lot in its current configuration predated the zoning development pattern. The zoning requirements. In some cases, it doesn't. If it doesn't predate it, then you need special use permit or BZA, special exception, for instance. And that's just right out of the gate. Someone sent us a building permit application, and my, again, tortured brain is like filtering, like, boop, 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 does this need? And then most of the time it's fine, most of the time, but sometimes it's not. And, that's not the news the applicant wants to hear. It might be their first house they've ever built. They might have bought it from somebody who's like, buildable lot in the burgeoning Churchill neighborhood, and not doing any real due diligence, buying it, spending money on all these soft costs, right? Architectural drawings, legitimate construction material, only to find out that, not
going to work.
Straight to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200. We got to go get a special use permit. So
do you end up, is it ideal that somebody reaches out to you, to help even find the right property, like before the thing is purchased?
So we've got a good relationship with a lot of commercial residential real estate agents who are familiar with what we do. Again, there's that trust there, and they'll reach out to us with their client and say, hey, we're looking at this property. Can you please like start the clock on, a little bit of due diligence here and let us know what what our by right options are, or what a good outcome might be for like a special use permit if you want to do something more dense, for instance, than what you could do legally.
Would a good client also be for you, like an architect that just needs somebody who's a zoning expert to walk through their design, right?
Yeah, we've got a few of those too. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the developer or the purchaser directly, where you can help maybe, and if they need a service provider, I think is what you called it, like an architect you could recommend, or they have somebody on staff with them, or an architect that just themselves has a client and they maybe reach out to you as a consultant and say, can you help us understand, is this going to work? Or
because you could read just like the standard zoning thresholds in the zoning ordinance, but there are other things that play into it. There's like a whole supplemental regulations chapter. And again, we're like mostly city specific, but most localities have the structure of like, here are the base regulations. Here are some other things that might apply depending on X, X, and X. And we can more decisively work through that ordinance with respect to what the goal is of the architect or developer, if that's what you're talking about. So.
Yeah, the way I described to the team, difference in zoning and building code is zoning tells you where you can put certain kinds of things, and then the building code says how do you build these things once the city's okay with it. Existing.
It's a very simple but effective way of describing it.
That's why the city sewer with the grease ends up coming to play, because like they're like, okay, well, you're going into our thing that now we govern.
The public right of way.
This
you need an encroachment.
Oh
man. Yeah, that's a 4-letter word for me.
Really?
Encroachment, yeah. No disrespect to Public Works, but that is a bear of a process to go through.
Speaking of coordination, we're peripherally in there, but MEP, we stop after 5 feet, which ends up.
You got to coordinate with the civil engineer.
And a guy that knows all of that magical stuff about how to.
Don't know who you're talking about.
Somebody who may have these expertise. Yeah, that's wild, man. So you got your residential thing. So ideally they've come to you, they've worked through the process of thinking, can I do what I want? You're consulting with an architect, which to us is similar to having you to the architect might be to us like a trade contractor design assist with us. It's a consultant to say, hey, is this buildable? Is this something that you could reasonably assume you can visualize materials in making this done? So to me, we like having that kind of consultant. So I'd imagine an architect having somebody that's a zoning expert would be perfect type of consultant, because again, who's responsible for knowing the nuance of the building code, not the building code, but the zoning, ordinances. And so then it goes to permit, gets through that, gets built. That's kind of the standard process, right? And then inspections and everything.
Right.
If that's a residential situation, how might that vary or differ in the commercial application?
Commercial can be a little different. In the lead up to permitting, sometimes special inspections are triggered depending on what type of structural engineering is involved. Usually, anything involving steel, simplifying it again, is going to require some semblance of special inspections, where basically says the city's review of a certain structural mechanism that you're doing kind of stops here, and to fill in that gap, you need to hire a special inspections agency to review what you're proposing and sign off on that scope of work. So again, simplifying it, it's usually stuff relating to steel beams.
So special inspections, just as a quick pause, because that's a word we hear often, and I don't really know much about it because it's not in our trade.
And I'm not a building code professional, but but I know where it fits
shows up.
I know where it fits into the actual building permitting process. So
I see.
You're required to go through that agreement, to fill out the Schedule 17 checklist of applicable special inspections items.
Exactly like when to call it into play, how to get it done. But there's basically somebody who's a special inspector who does these special inspections, basically. Right?
Different inspections agencies like ECS, Zanino, et cetera. A lot of people that we might be familiar with. So, so like that's one thing. But then you get permitted, right? And we're kind of available, but we're not actually like billing anything during that time. If a change order prompts a permit revision, we'll help with that. But one thing we're having to help out with more and more is the actual certificate of occupancy process. So that can be just as, if not more stressful than the actual permitting process. Like
beginning to end.
Yeah. It's sometimes a pretty climatic conclusion to like the story of a building, right? So, I mean, there are times where, and then there's temporary COs. There are times where it's honestly maybe as stressed as I get doing this line of work, where there's a temporary CO need to authorize temporary or partial, rather, there are two different types, but a partial CO to authorize development of a certain portion of what your permit was covering.
Gotcha.
I mean, not development, occupancy of a certain portion of what the development was covering. And, the leasing company, let's say it's a multifamily building, the leasing company might have already like leased up the top floor of a building, right?
Yeah.
And the contractor's working their way down. So you need at that point to coordinate every single building and trade permit on the property to either be fully finalized out or have a partial inspection, a partial final with CO inspection requested that explicitly states which units were inspected and approved from the inspections department. And so that's your plumbing permit, that's your building permit, electrical, mechanical, sprinkler, elevator, like everything. So that's like the biggest cat herding exercise.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just us telling the general contractor like a checklist of what they need to do, right? And then it's left up to all the people in the field to execute on that. And then it's left up to me and others coordinating with the city to review all of that.
Yeah.
And it's been like buzzer beater status before. Like building commissioner's office is doing great work, and some of the ways that they do great work is they understand the customer service response that they have to commit to.
Yeah.
And so there was one instance where a top floor of a mixed use building was set to be leased up like one Saturday.
Yeah.
I had to that week like fight for my life to get the partial CO issued at like 4:59 on Friday.
Jesus.
And it was like diffusing a nuclear bomb. That's what I felt like.
Yeah. You're just sitting there like, do I cut the green line?
Yeah. It's I mean, couldn't do it without the relationships that I have on both sides of the fence. But that's one specific situation where maintaining a really positive working relationship with the locality is invaluable. I'm not sure I would have gotten that otherwise.
Yeah,
So,
I would imagine understanding, at least empathizing the stresses from everyone's perspective is vital in that scenario, especially the cities. Like we are very apprehensive about pushing a jurisdiction in general because we don't want to ruin a relationship we have with them, but sometimes we have to advocate as much as we can. We generally take the approach, here's what the code allows. We're going to try to go through this chapter administrative section and request for this revision. But if you say no, it's your professional opinion. Here's how we see it as a professional, why we would justify it as equal to the intent of the code. But if they say no, a lot of people will try to push us to go further. I'm like, I mean, no, I can't. I mean, it's just like when the judge hits the gavel, that's their decision.
Right.
And, in order to maintain.
I mean, there is a formal appeal if you want to override a building commissioner, like you can do that, but it's like, you want to talk about getting an attorney involved, like that's when you get an attorney. Like you better be sure, because it's not going to be pretty and going to court to like there's a specific department in DHCD, right, that you can't appeal at the state level a local building commissioner's opinion on something, and it's easier said than done. That's for sure.
Expensive politically and in terms of real capital and time, and is it worth it for everything versus moving on? But that's tough. That's I'm sure you find yourself in the middle of that way more than we do, and that's just part of keeping those relationships is very difficult. I probably contribute to the stress.
No. You guys are good. A lot of the stress is mostly just generated on expectations for wrapping up a job, combined with like the actual physical reality of wrapping up a job. So, and that I can be right in that bottleneck more often than not. So
yeah, the herding cats and all the different people. And then at that point too, it's the peak stress for everyone, because maybe something's come up that is a code violation or has been identified as one by somebody. Now that's a change order. So that's a conversation. Is it the designer that's going to charge a change order, or the contractor has to rip this stuff out and replace it? And I'm just hypothetical here, just imagining finish line, and you get through your inspections, and somebody identifies, we've seen it before, where this type of cabling can't be used in this type of building for all 200 units for the HVAC connection. And now we have our client running around now he's got that resolved. But that took a tremendous amount of political capital, I think, from him, and working through and staying patient and keeping his head cool.
yeah.
And that's the key there, is do no harm and try, I'm guessing, just try your best to just stay, just make it to the weekend.
Yeah.
Survive until
No, weekends
the
are
weekend.
nice. Weekends are nice.
Yeah. Well, we're running over by 10 minutes now, and
okay.
so we do. This has been a great conversation. I loved at the end diving in a little bit deeper, specifically to the technical. And like you said, I can imagine a world where we could talk another hour about all of that. And so that.
Yeah, maybe we should start a zoning podcast.
I
Yeah.
think genuinely,
I'm sure people would love
once
that.
you start scrapping, like, man, there's so much here to be talking about, but we can only do but so much, and we appreciate you inviting us. How do we get the?
Yeah, where's the applause?
Hold on a second.
Waiting
Oh,
on the
there it
applause.
is.
There we
All right,
go.
we've made it. Oh, and thank you to Charlie Wilson from Baker Development Resources here, and their office here downtown, beautiful Main Street. You see is that the Dominion building right there?
That is the Dominion building.
Yeah. So thanks again for having us. We can see you next time.
All right.
See y'all.
Thanks.